Hey, everybody. Happy Friday night. I'm Anjanette Levy, and welcome to my channel. If it is your first time here, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for returning. And if you're watching on replay, thanks so much for watching on replay. I love it when I log on and see all the replay watchers. Do me a favor. If you're just joining for the first time, hit that like button. If you're just joining, you're a returning viewer, hit that like button. No matter if you're a returning viewer, new viewer, hit that like button, the thumbs up, hit the bell for notifications. Hitting that thumbs up really helps the video, pushes it out into the algorithm in the YouTube universe. And so it really helps me out. I'm trying to grow my little channel here, which we've been doing a good job of it. And it's all thanks to all of you who watch. Also, drop a note in the comments if you would. Let me know from which city and country, state you're watching from. Have so many great viewers from around the world. Other states. It's really fantastic. I have a great guest joining me today. So I'm going to bring him in here in just a moment, but we're going to be talking tonight about the latest details released in the Idaho murders case. Of course, we've covered that extensively here on the channel. And now Brian Kohberger is serving his 4 consecutive life sentences in the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. He's in the J block. He's in a box for 23 hours a day. He gets to shower every other day. He is, when he's moved, I've been told he's shackled. He's in restraints. He gets out 1 hour a day, and the rec area looks like horrendous, and maybe this is a perfect place for him. Maybe he likes it. I don't know. But he is where he is, and that is where he will be for the foreseeable future. I have some things to say about that because I feel like we have not heard the last of Brian Kohberger. I just have that feeling, and usually my gut is right when I have these feelings. So some crime scene photos were released to KTVB, Boise, Idaho TV station. And the reason these were released to them is because the public records law in Idaho, it allows for a quicker response to Idaho residents than out-of-state residents. I have a whole tale to tell you about this mess. I've been requesting this stuff for weeks. I've been denied despite the gag order being lifted, and it's been quite the frustrating experience. So I'm going to show you what we have so far that was released to KTVB in Boise. But first, I want to bring in Bobby Chacon. Bobby Chacon has covered this case with me from the very beginning on Law and Crime, and he's a retired FBI agent. He's amazing. He's also a lawyer. He is a screenwriter. He's fantastic. So he does all kinds of cool things, and he is pretty much an expert in killers, murderers. So everybody, welcome Bobby. Give Bobby a huge shout out in the comments. Bobby, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
It's always good to see you, Anjanette. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. I want your thoughts, first of all. We were on the air together for just a short time on the sentencing day. What were your thoughts on Brian Kohberger actually, I guess, getting scared? He must have gotten scared. I mean, they took it all the way up to the end, filing for a continuance. Their motion to, there's some other dude did it motion. That's what I call it. The alternate perpetrator motion failed. I assume Ann Taylor went to him and said, Brian, the car's out of gas. We have no other options. So what were your thoughts when that actually happened?
I mean, I guess I was a little surprised. But when I sat back and thought about it, both from an investigator standpoint and a lawyer standpoint, like you just said, these things kind of take on a specific, a certain pattern. Mm-hmm. And there are certain pretrial motions that defendants make. And, sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. But all of those pretrial motions, when you finish with them, then the defense assesses what the likelihood of success at trial is going to be. You mm-hmm. really can't do that until you know how the judge is going to rule on all your pretrial motions, because getting certain evidence suppressed, getting certain statements suppressed possibly, all of that kind of strengthens or weakens your case. And so I knew that there was a certain point as the trial was nearing mm-hmm. that those rulings on the pretrial motions were all going against the defense.
Right.
And rightfully so. I think they were legally sound. Mm-hmm. But I think that at that certain point, I think you're right. I think the defense kind of said, well, we've kind of shot our shots here. We've tried to get certain evidence thrown out or suppressed, and we haven't been successful. Now here's what we have going forward to trial. And I think most defense attorneys probably say is, it's your decision. You're the client, but here's what we think is going to happen at trial. Here's what we think is going to happen. And then you make it, they can't make the decision for you whether or not you want to plead guilty. But I think they give you kind of an honest assessment of your chances at trial. And then then they consult with him and he makes the decision with them. And in this case, he made the decision, to plead guilty and to take that life without possibility of parole and to take the death penalty off the table. Because I assume that they told him his chances were slim at getting an acquittal. And that in even more than that, I think they told him that the chances of getting the death penalty are probably high in this case, given the whole nature of the case and the nature of the victims, and things like that. I did a lot of murder cases in New York City in the 80s and 90s where it was one drug dealer killing another drug dealer. You're never going to get, a death penalty in something like that. Not that we had the death penalty in New York at the time, but the type of victim you have and the type of crime it is, totally innocent victim in their sleep, totally butchered. I think all of that plays into whether or not you're going to prevail in getting the death penalty. And I think all of those things worked against him in this case.
Yeah. And what I found interesting though, was his willingness to plead guilty. And I say this only because they could have done this much earlier. I mean, they were losing every motion, every motion that mattered, at least, I mean,
yeah,
like, Hitler threw him a few crumbs here and there on some little things, but they were losing everything. I mean, they even conceded in one of their filings where they tried to get Hitler they wanted to bar Dylan from being able to describe the guy she saw in all black as having bushy eyebrows, because they conceded in their motion that would be like her, despite her not being able to identify him, that would be like her basically standing up and identifying him. I mean, they knew how damning that was.
Right.
So what took so long? I mean, they wanted to delay. They didn't get their delay. I'm just like, they had to have gone to Brian before.
Yeah, you're right. That's what I'm thinking too. It could have been the delay could have been him saying, no way, I'm not going to deal. I'm not going to deal. And then, finally they prevailed upon him and said, well, let us just make the phone call and see what the deal might be. Because, defense attorneys routinely do that. They reach out. They don't, a lot of people that go to trial and, you can't use that at trial. You can't go to trial and then say, well, they called 2 weeks ago asking for a deal. You can't do that. And so there are probably people that have gone to some of these more famous trials that we've all seen and watched and commented that where their defense attorney picked up the phone and asked for the deal and the deal wasn't sufficient to get the person to plead guilty, but you can't obviously ever use that in front of a jury. So I think that it was probably him. And then they said, let's just kind of give us the opportunity to reach out and see what the deal might be. It wasn't a great deal because all they did was take the death penalty off the table. I mean, look, I would have rather see him get the death penalty. I'm a death penalty proponent, but and so when I say that, it's a great deal. I mean, it wasn't a great deal. I think that the deal was lacking in a lot of respects, but it wasn't a great deal for him either because, all it was the death penalty or no death penalty. He's going to spend, the conditions you just described. I mean, I don't know that I could do that, knowing I'm a little older than him, obviously, but knowing he's probably going to spend the next 40 years or more maybe in that tiny little cell with that tiny little 1 hour of recreation. I don't know. I don't know if I'd rather just say, okay, this has been my life. And, and I don't know. So I don't think, so that's a long way of saying that, I think that he might've even talked to his parents, and said, they might've all as a family decided, about it. But I think that it was at that point in the process where that usually happens, where you've all your pretrial motions have been made, and now going forward, what you're facing, and they did, and he made that decision. He made the decision. Make no bones about it. But I wish they would have required a little more from him.
They required nothing from him.
I mean, other than saying he did it,
right?
but there should have been probably a little more. Like, it's a negotiation.
Like a proffer.
These are negotiations. Yeah. And they should have negotiated a more detailed allocution. Now, the allocution being him standing up on the record and saying exactly what he did. And I thought the legally minimal sufficient thing is what they allowed him to say. And I thought during those negotiations, it would have been perfectly proper to demand a little bit more of him. You're going to say this, you're going to admit to that, you're going to tell us this. And for whatever reason, if they negotiated, I don't know what, we don't know the insides of the negotiations, but I certainly hope, or I would have hoped that they would have gotten a little bit more out of him.
I agree. Like 150,000%. I agree with you. I want to shout out our moderators too. I forgot to shout out the mods in the beginning. I couldn't do this without them. So everybody give a good shout out to the mods. Webby is here, Mel Mac, Mo, Monty. I think the docket's in here too. So everybody shout them out. They're fantastic. One thing, Bobby, the whole thing about not requiring a proffer to me is insane in the membrane in this case, because they could have at least said, because when the defense comes to you weeks before trial, weeks before jury selection, and says, make us an offer, they're bowing down. You've got them. I mean, you knew you had them before, more than likely, despite Bill Thompson kind of in that plea hearing saying, well, we don't have this and we don't have that. We don't have proof of this. He's saying everything they don't have instead of everything they do have, which prosecutors don't typically do. But you've got him. You've got him by the throat, so to speak. I'll be very polite about this. So they could have said, okay, Anne, he pleads. We'll knock off that burglary charge. He pleads to all 4 murders. He sits down and he answers some questions. We need to know where the knife is. We need to know where the clothes are. And we need to know how exactly he went through the house, because that's corroborating evidence. And he can then never, ever come back.
That's right.
Ever.
That's right.
Because where it stands right now,
especially the knife,
Bobby,
when you mention that. I ran the FBI dive team for 19 years, as you know. And I find things underwater. And there was rumors a couple of weeks ago, there was somebody seen near a river or something. If it was in the water, I personally would have volunteered to take the retired members of my team out to look for it. And you're right. If you just think about finding that murder weapon, and then matching it and get positive, and he tells you where it is. There's going to be no appeal. Even if he makes an appeal, one of the few appeals that he can make, I mean, he's done. Just the murder weapon itself. Just think of that, what the future of that would have been. And why not demand that of him? And I don't understand, he could have said it was anywhere and you could have went on wild goose chases, but we would have done that. There would have been probably volunteer groups to go out and look for this stuff. So yeah, I really, that's a really frustrating part, especially to me, because part of my job for 19 years was going into water and looking for murder weapons and victims and things like that. And so I was really looking forward to, watching that unfold, and now we'll never know.
And one thing, even if they couldn't find it, if he could have told them exactly, because, that whole thing about somebody spotting him by the river, they had his cell phone. Kind of pinging down in that area. And then they had some soil samples that the FBI tested that they found on the shovel in his trunk of his car. This is in the Moscow police reports. And it was dirt. It was dirt that was possibly by a water source, they said, in the Moscow area. So maybe it's buried by a river, maybe he didn't throw it in a river. Maybe he buried it by a river, since his cell phone was showing he was by the river and the soil sample shows. It's I mean, I'm being a little bit dramatic and sarcastic, but you know what I'm saying? And
when you're looking for something metal, you can use metal detectors, you can use magnetometers. There's a lot of technology when it's a hunk of metal that you're looking for.
Yep.
Much more so than if it's clothing or plastic or something like that. And so I've always found it easier to find knives and guns rather than say a rope that was used in a strangulation case or something like that. So if you're looking for a big size knife like that, you can deploy some tools that make it easier to find. And yeah, and I don't understand the downside of not requiring him to take that. And one of the things you mentioned is in the plea negotiations that I've always been involved in, there's a process to it, and we always required a higher price as the process went along to trial. If you're going to plead 2 weeks before trial, the price is going to be higher than if you plead a year before trial, because now you've made us gone through all the work, all the preparation for trial, and it's a lot. I used to do very complex RICO trials with hundreds of charges and hundreds of witnesses, months of trial, and that's a lot of work. And if you plead, the earlier you plead in that process, the less work we have to go through and the less trauma we have to put our witnesses through. And so you get a better deal the earlier in that process you plead guilty. If you plead guilty just before trial, it's like, hey, we've already done the work. We're ready to go. We're ready for the jury. You're not saving us anything. We're going to trial. So the price is higher. And so that's what it was. It was kind of a sliding scale the way we used to do it. Here, it looks like they didn't offer any deal until the defense actually picked up the phone and asked for one. But certainly, it seems like the prosecution had all the cards in these negotiations. But the way the deal turned out, it seemed like he had all the leverage because he pled to the deal was the minimal amount that he had to do to actually get the plea. I didn't even think the allocution was sufficient, but he did the legally least amount that he had to do to get that plea. And I don't understand that part of it.
I don't get it either. And I thought that the answers given at the press conference afterwards, just Judge Hippler said, how can we trust anything he would say would be true? I've said this before. Killers like to brag. And also, even if they don't tell the whole truth, a lot of times they say enough to where you can find the truth in between the lies.
Absolutely.
And they should have said, take us to where they should have put him in a transport van. You're going to take us to where you dumped that knife. You're going to take us. And I kind of have a feeling it's not in the river. He may have buried it by a river.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that. I could be dead wrong about that, but that's my thought on it. And I just feel like they allowed him to walk into prison with currency, and that currency is his story, and that story has value. Coming to Netflix in 2028 or 2029, Conversations with a Killer, Bryan Kohberger. Or my other feeling is that God only knows what happens. You see what happens sometimes, Bobby. Even though he's on camera saying this, admitting it to the world and admitting it to Judge Hippler, how do we know they're not planning some habeas action? I could be totally wrong on this. I could be totally off base. But I have covered enough cases that went totally wonky and haywire. Now, granted, they were convicted at trial, but still things happen. And you didn't require this guy to give up anything. I
covered a story weeks ago in Minnesota where a killer, 4 counts, he was sentenced on 4 murders, and it was 4 counts. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole on all four murders. 4 sentences, life without the possibility of parole. He's now in a halfway house because he killed his mother and father and his sister and maybe 2 sisters. Because he was 16 when the crime was committed, he was still eligible for life with no parole. But now the governor of Minnesota, they've changed the law. So retroactively, now if you're below 18, if you're a minor, so to speak, you're not eligible for that anymore. So retroactively, they went back and said, this now 30-year-old, he's been in jail for like 20, 25 years or whatever.
Right.
But he got sentenced to 4 life with no possibility of paroles, and he's now in a halfway house. So like you said, anything can happen. We saw the jail escape in New Orleans where 10 people went flying out of a jail. Now he's in a supermax. He's probably not going to be able to escape. But pardons, who knows what the future holds.
I'm telling you, and this whole thing about, he has Asperger's, level 1 autism. God only knows. Like, I have seen this. I have seen this movie before. What
if they change the law to that? What if they say, if you're a level 1 Asperger's, you can't be eligible for that penalty. You can't be eligible for life with no parole. And then they retroactively apply it to this guy, and then he gets out.
I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that could happen. And I just feel like the defense is like, I ran into one of the defense attorneys. I went to the Ada County Jail the day before the sentencing, and I just happened to run into one of the defense attorneys. She's like, we're making no public statement. I'm like, well, I didn't even come here to talk to you. I'm trying to see if we can take a tour of the jail. Like, you know, like, but hi, I'm Anjanette Levy. I just wanted to introduce myself. Like, but now that we're meeting face to face and you won't return my emails, right? So we're making no public statements. Well, there's a reason. If they were washing their hands of this, boop, boop, boop. I mean, why not come out and make a statement? I've seen this movie before. I just have this feeling, and maybe I'm totally off base. I just feel like there's something going on.
I think there's a Supreme Court case. I read it recently. I can't remember the title of it, but you know, so people are talking about the appeal, not appeal. He waived his right to appeal. But if you think about it this way, and I think the Supreme Court said this, there's a narrow avenue of appeal, and that is, you know, basically ineffective assistance of counsel. Suppose his lawyers lied to him about the deal. Suppose that they had a much stronger defense case than they let on, and they just wanted to get rid of this thing. Or whatever it be. Imagine how unfair that is to a defendant, that, you know, the defense lawyer didn't do their job and could have won the case. I'm not saying in this case. I'm just saying in general, the rationale of allowing an appeal in that narrow avenue is because you want to protect a defendant from an unscrupulous lawyer who gets him to plead guilty to something that he probably shouldn't have pled guilty to. So what, and then waived his appeals. Mm-hmm. So if they do that and it's later come out and said, oh, that lawyer's crooked or that lawyer didn't do their job, I think that's a very narrow avenue to ineffective assistance of counsel. You know,
it's a high standard. It's a high standard.
It's a high standard. And me and my federal prosecutors, we'd often like jump through hoops to help the defense, you know, in certain pretrial motions at trial.
So they couldn't say that.
So they couldn't say that. We actually helped maybe a guy that wasn't such a great defense attorney be a better defense attorney because we were thinking of that kind of appeal or appellate argument. And so, but he's able to appeal in a very, very narrow set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've seen cases where later on an attorney will fall on the sword and say I was ineffective. Ann Taylor doesn't want to be found ineffective. She's said that in court many times, but I've seen some cases where an attorney then filed an affidavit later and said, oh, I didn't do this. Oh, I didn't do that. I was ineffective. I was ineffective, all my fault.
I've seen cases where they knew they were losing at trial, and then he started making obvious mistakes on purpose so that later on he was giving his client an out on an ineffective assistance argument.
Here's Ryan Wimmer. Thanks for the super chat. Maybe they did ask for a statement and Kohberger said no. It is clear the prosecution was not confident in the case. It wasn't ironclad. No statement, no deal. That's what I say, Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you that I don't see the prosecution as feeling they had a weak case. I mean, I don't think they had a weak case personally. And I mean, it could be that, you know, but I don't know that that's why. I mean, that's an explanation and it's a plausible one. But I don't see them as having. I mean, there is no slam dunk case. There is no ironclad case ever.
Right.
But you know, and I know it's scary going to trial. I've been there, you know, no matter how strong you feel about your case, the minute the jury goes out, you sit there and you wait and you wait and you wait and you go, you know, they could decide whatever they want. You live with the case for years. They only know it from what supposedly they're supposed to, if they, you know, if they abide by their instructions, they only know what was presented to them in the courtroom. And so, you know, yeah, I think, but I don't know that, you know, because like I said, it was a negotiation and it seems like he did the absolute minimum required under the law to do it. So there was no negotiation. He just said flat out, this is what I want. And they said, okay. And I don't understand that because they were ready to go to trial.
This is an interesting point. Your favorite uncle says, I thought Ann Taylor said on the record, not Redford. I think that's a typo. There's no Robert Redford here, but that makes me laugh. I love Robert Redford as an actor. I thought Ann Taylor said on the record, if the continuance wasn't granted, she couldn't effectively represent her client. That's one thing. Like could she come back and say, because she did ask for more time, Bobby. I mean, Hitler could have said, okay, fine. We'll give you 60 or 90 days. And she didn't give a specific time that she wanted for the continuance, but she said, I can't effectively represent my client. I mean, maybe they come back later and say, he really wanted a trial, but Hitler put a gun to our head. We told him we weren't ready. We filed this mega, brief, and he just told us to pound sand.
Yeah.
So I was,
and
I was ineffective. I had no choice. I felt like my client's going to get walked down the hall and, he's going to get shot in the heart by the firing squad.
Yeah, I thought that, I mean, if you look at her words that she used on the record, right, ineffective, I think that's by design, and that's by, like you said, setting up a possible appeal later, because that really is the only appeal. And also, I thought, the fact that they made them put on the record that he was a level 1 autism patient, that was another thing that they're putting into the record so that they could use possibly later on an appeal. And so, yeah, but I think, remember, if this were to be appealed on that basis, an appellate court should, and I think would, make the defense go through every single thing that they would have done if granted a continuance, and every single thing that they didn't get to do in preparing for the defense because they weren't granted the continuance. So they'll literally say, okay, what work would you have done? What your legal team, what would they have done more if they were granted the continuance? And they would probably make something up. We would analyze this, we would look closer at that, but they would literally make them go through their work product and say, what wouldn't you have been able to do because the continuance wasn't granted? And if it was, what would you have been able to do to better prepare for the describing what they would have done in those 60 days or those 90 days that they didn't get to do, and make them say it on the record and make them show it. You can always make stuff up, but an appellate court could look through that too and say that's bogus or whatever. But the appellate court should make them go through that exercise of saying, okay, tell us now exactly as a defense team what you would have done in that 30, 60, 90 days, whatever you were requesting.
Yeah, definitely. And she never said that, and she never gave a time frame. She just said, we just need more time. And she should have said, look, we need 60 days. Like, I mean, she could have bought herself
and
some
she
time.
could have put on the record what they would have done in those 60 days.
Yep. So let's look now at the crime scene photos. I want to tell you first, Bobby, I have been through some hoops here trying to get these records. The Moscow Police Department on the day of the sentencing released like 314 police reports or something like that. And so I put in a request the day the gag order was vacated, and put in a request for crime scene photos, the video from the house next door that shows the white car, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I requested a number of other materials. 5 days later, denied, despite the gag order being lifted, the non-dissemination order. Submitted another request, no response. I mean, they had no problem lickety split denying me, but no response. I've gotten nothing since then. So it's been a little frustrating. I know they're a small city, a small police department, but in Idaho, if you're a city resident, they're required to respond to you within 3 working days. If you're an out-of-state resident, 21 working days. So KTVB TV in Boise got like about 200 crime scene photos, and these are not Idaho State Police crime lab processing photos. These are like the Moscow PD walked through the house and I think just did some documentation. I think that's what these were. So I'm going to show some of these. These are what I would call sanitized. I don't think anybody needs to see the ones that are not being shown, because some of what we're seeing is bad enough. But this is, for instance, this is Kaylee's bedroom. Nobody was found in Kaylee's bedroom. But what is very sad, if you look, and I unfortunately cannot zoom in, but if you look into the, if you look at the floor by the wheels of the chair at the desk, you'll see Murphy is under the desk.
Oh yeah.
The dog is hiding under the desk. In the police reports, literally it says that the officer had to like coax Murphy out, like he was back there and he was scared. So I wish I could kind of zoom into that. Maybe actually let me pull it up on I think NBC News has a pretty good shot of it because they're an affiliate of
This is
KTVB, is
Kaylee's
one of their
picture?
affiliates. I'm sorry.
I thought Kaylee had moved out of the house. I thought
Well,
that
she had pretty much. She was living in Coeur d'Alene for the most part.
okay.
But she was back for the weekend, and
She maintained a room there. She still had a room there.
yeah.
Okay.
So let me share my screen because then that way I can actually zoom in on this photo because I can't zoom in on it the way I have this uploaded. So let me share my screen. So this just made me really sad. Maybe that you can see it a little better there.
Yeah, once you mentioned it, I actually said, "Oh, yeah, there he is," and I knew he was in that room, but I couldn't see it until you pointed it out.
So basically, Murphy is hiding back there, and he is under the desk, which I find to be just like, my God, that poor. I mean, the whole thing is horrific, but the poor dog is probably thinking like, what happened to my person, and is kind of hiding back there.
Yeah, because now he's got a bunch of strangers in the house stomping around taking pictures. And
Yeah, it's like cops, like what's going on?
Yeah.
This is the view. So this is if you look over to the right of your screen, that is the staircase that goes down to the front door. If you look straight down, you're looking into Xana's room, and that is blurred because that is a crime scene in there. And this is the beer pong table that you see with the red Solo cups.
So this would be the middle floor of the three?
Correct.
Am I correct in that? Okay.
That's the second floor.
Right.
I'm going to show you this next picture, Bobby. This one is chilling to me.
These are the first time I'm seeing these.
Yeah. This is the sliding glass door.
Okay.
That is how the sliding glass door, that is how Bryan Kohberger apparently left the sliding glass door. He left it open.
Mm.
And if you look back, you'll see some footprints in the snow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm assuming those are his footprints.
Yeah. Well, the theory was the car was parked behind the house.
Yeah. Back up that hill.
Yeah.
Because if you go back up that hill, there's that parking lot where you could be parked. It's for the apartment building next door, and you could literally see straight into Maddie's bedroom.
Yeah, I would assume they would have taken those impressions. And when I was on the FBI crime scene team, we were trained to, take those impressions. You pour the stuff in there, and you take and you get a good shoe impression. And you can match that to literally a distinct shoe because every one of us has different gaits. Our shoes wear differently. Some of our shoes have a particular cut in them because you stepped on something, and it's almost like a fingerprint. A boot, the longer you wear them, the more unique to you they are. And so they, sometimes they can be as good as a fingerprint.
I'm going to zoom in actually on the, I'm going to zoom in again on this. It's the NBC News picture. I uploaded these as files, but I can't zoom in on them when I do that. So let's just look at it on NBC News. So you can see a little bit better. Can you see that zoomed in a little bit? The footprints?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like they go up, they go out, and then up. So, and then
actually, those
there.
That actually looks like those actually. I can't tell too much, but like the one or two of them look like they're actually coming towards the house. Yeah.
Toward and then away.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that looks like it's going away. And that one to me looks
exactly
like it's going in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to me, it's just like, oh my God. Like,
which would make sense because he would come and go the same way because he's trying to be quick about it.
Yeah. Especially because this is my opinion only. I believe that his plan did not go according to plan. That is my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that, Bobby.
No, I very much think he was going after one particular person in that house, and that the rest of it was unplanned, and he reacted to it the way he did. But I think that the plan was to go in and have one victim and get out.
And this is the living room area. These are college kids, right? They're partying. It was big weekend for the football game. Red Solo cups, alcohol everywhere. This one is particularly sad. This is Maddie's bedroom, and you can tell, like, these are, if you remember the famous photo on the porch, she was wearing these black boots. So, they've been out drinking. They come home and she, kicks off her clothes, gets ready for bed, and just horrific. And then there's what I want to talk to you though about, here's the kitchen, Bobby. The kitchen, this is just a photograph.
It's just, both the living room picture and this picture is chilling to me because it just looks like every house I lived in college. It looks like any house that any of us would have lived in college and years of our lives. And for this to have happened to these kids, they just, I don't know if you saw the documentary, what is it, on Prime Video? It really shows Maddie's family and Ethan's family. And it really shows these just were good kids. These just would, and I think they would have been good adults. I think they would have been, it's just every reason. And they came from good families. And it was just such I don't know. I've seen a lot of murder and death in my life. And, you just never get used to seeing kids struck down like that.
No, it's horrific. And, the DoorDash, Xana's DoorDash is on the counter. The brown bag with like the grease stain next to the orange juice.
Oh, yeah.
It's just really sad. It's hard to see it. But that's the DoorDash bag. And if you look at it from looking in the window, it says Xana on the receipt. I want to talk to you a little bit about motive, Bobby, because you just said you think, and this is, that's been my thought on this for a long time, has been that, and Bill Thompson's been quoted as saying in some interviews that he could have picked that house out that night. I don't buy that for 1 minute. I think he had his eye on that house for a while. The way that house is laid out, that's a weird house. You'd have to know where you were going. That's my opinion. Just because you'd have to be able to, coming in that slider the way you would, and then going up, having to come in the slider and then go through the kitchen and then up the stairs. Like, you'd have to kind of know a little bit about where you're going. And he went right to the third floor. I think he went in there. I hate to say this, and people don't like it when I say it. I think he went in there for Maddie and didn't expect Kaylee there. And I think his plan was interrupted.
That's exactly my opinion as well. Like I said, I always work with the caveat that I could be wrong, and that there are other people with other valid opinions. But that's just my opinion, and my opinion is exactly that he went right to Maddie's room. He was after Maddie. He didn't realize Kaylee was going to be there, and that surprised him. Took him a little while longer. He comes out. Xana confronts him either on that stairway or on the landing down on her level, and then he has to go after her down that hallway. And in doing so towards her room, she retreats towards her room, and that's when obviously Ethan becomes involved. And none of that, I don't think, was part of his plan. And that's why he had, once that was done, I think even may have sat down. They said he may have sat down.
They say that's not true.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. That was like part of the Dateline that Gilbert is now saying. He's come out since he told the Statesman that that's not true. That whole sitting down thing is not true.
I think what happened is, once he's obviously done in Xana's room with Xana and Ethan, that he's got to get out of there. That's why he goes right by Dylan, because now his plan was blown up. He's been in there a lot longer and obviously had to confront a lot more people than he ever thought. And I think he's just disheveled, and his adrenaline, and he's unfocused now. And so he walks right by her on the way out.
Yeah. He's shot. He can't.
Yeah. Because, the adrenaline that it takes to get into that kind of a rage mode is a lot. And the more adrenaline is required, the larger the crash is when you come down. And I think he may have started to feel his coming down, because now he's, done with the last victim. And now he's starting to lose focus. He's starting to get foggy, because now the adrenaline is crashing possibly. And now he feels he's got to get back to his car and get the heck out of there.
And that's, I don't know if we'll have time to look at it tonight, but here's the Idaho Statesman we can look at just a minute of it or so, but they actually got their hands on, and another Idaho news outlet got their hands on the video from, this is him circling kind of like a vulture, like circling prey like a vulture. This starts at 3:30 in the morning, Bobby, and it goes on for a good 35 minutes that he's circling that neighborhood back and forth, back and forth. He's waiting for the lights to go off. He's waiting for the right time to get into that house. So I just don't buy that he didn't have his eye on that house before that night.
He's also looking to see if, there are parties in the neighboring houses, if there's other people out in the street partying or anywhere, he wants to make sure he's not going to be seen. And so he's probably doing a recon of the whole neighborhood to see, is there another house where people are up and partying and who might see him and stuff. And I think during this video, you even see the DoorDash driver go down the street, possibly looking for an address while he's doing these drive-bys. So it's conceivable that he may have even seen the DoorDash driver.
I've said in the past that I believe that this was a sexually motivated crime, and people have said to me, "What do you know? Like, hey, you don't know anything." And I may very well know nothing. I will concede that. But crimes, and I've often wondered if he left the sheath because this is a guy who it's been stated in the documents, people who knew him, he wanted a girlfriend, and he wanted a girlfriend badly. And sexual assault is not about love or sex. It's about power and control. And this is somebody who was yearning for female attention and could not get it. To me, I have often theorized that the reason the sheath was on the bed was because there's a potential in my mind that he wanted to commit a sexual assault and that Maddie was a fantasy for him. Now, I could be dead wrong on that. This could be totally a sexually motivated crime, and that the act of killing was sexually aroused. It aroused him sexually. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the whole, psychosexual phenomenon?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, most
you know about that. Like, I've only read about it in books.
I mean, the last serial killer case that I worked while I was in the FBI was Israel Keys, and he was a sexual sadist. And most are. And while I'm not an FBI profiler, I'm very good friends with two of my best friends who I literally talk to every day because we're on different text strings. Is Jim Fitzgerald from the Unabomber case, and then Jim Clemente, who is, of course, the person who Criminal Minds, the TV series, was based on. And so, I always ping them guys off, and that is a very common theme. And not that, and I get a lot of hate because this guy was not a serial killer. I get that. I'm just talking about people that do this type of attack. He might have been an aspiring one. I don't know. But I think you're right. I think he was obsessed. And now we've seen, he had the IDs of two former coworkers, both women. Yes. He had made several overtures to people at his school over in Pullman, women who kind of found him a little creepy, a little weird, and things like that. So I think you are right. I think he falls into either the specific incel category or someone like that had trouble establishing normal relationships with women, and this built a fantasy in his head. And now with social media being what it is, people can feed that fantasy by just going to social media and looking at someone's Instagram or looking at someone's social media every day. And they're doing every different things. They're putting videos, they're putting TikToks, whatever. And you literally can inject yourself into someone's life without them knowing it, because just by consuming, obsessively consuming their social media. I don't know if he did that. I don't have any proof. I wasn't on the inside of this investigation, but from the outside, and someone like me who's actually investigated people like this, yeah, it does look like it's entirely possible that he went in there either thinking he was going to commit a sexual assault and then a murder, or somehow get off on that, and then he was faced with something he didn't didn't know he was going to contend with, which is another person in that room, being Kaylee, and then obviously, Xana confronting him outside that room. So I think that all of that really messed up his plan. We don't know what his actual plan would have been. We may never know, but I think, like you said, I think we're going to hear from him in the future. Whether he will tell the truth or not, who knows? But I think you're right. I think there is a certain psychosexual element to this crime, given the victimology of the victims and given his past history with women, both in the recent term at his university where he was a teaching assistant, and in the past back in Pennsylvania where he was, collecting IDs, work IDs of female coworkers.
Yeah, and the only reason that I think a sexual assault may have been intended, because I feel like this has the hallmarks of a sexually motivated crime. But also, when the Dateline special aired, they said there were searches for pornography on his phone that talked about or were for, drunk girl, passed out girl, girl asleep, forced, things of that nature. That's who was asleep in that room.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but
yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That makes perfect sense. I didn't know that, but like that to me just reinforces what we're both of the opinion of. I think that reinforces it. The fact that he was. Yeah, I mean, I would like to know because he was a PhD student, and because if he was looking at past attacks or something, whether or not he had a condom on him, because he, if he was planning on doing a sexual assault and even a sexual assault murder, he knew enough not to want to leave his DNA behind. So would he have, I don't know. I've never heard that, whether he did have one on him or not. But we do know from past sexual sadists, when they do that attack, they sometimes will try to use a condom so as not to leave DNA behind.
Most definitely. And that's why, the guy that could have answered those questions was allowed to say, I did it, without answering any questions, which is somewhat maddening. And then, Bill Thompson stands up there and says, I want to be clear. This was not about, this was not a sexual crime, and we get it. There was no sexual assault, but there may not have been because it was interrupted. And I don't understand why that is so important to him. Because a crime can be sexually motivated without an actual sex act occurring or a sexual assault. So I find this to be, I don't know if maybe there's pressure from the university that they don't want. Oh my God.
No, I think
we just want to say he could be a psycho killer. But don't talk about sexual assault. I mean, but a lot of these things are sexually motivated. Look at Ted Bundy, and this is apparently somebody he was fascinated by.
Yeah, but you and I can talk about this and opine about this because that's what we do. But I think as a public official, if he had absolutely no evidence of that, then he has to come out and say that he didn't think it was. And I think at some point, on some level, it's maybe sympathetic to the families too, to kind of just put that out of people's minds and not, because the families hear this stuff and it, more, it upsets them even more. There's no need for him to kind of opine on that. I mean, I think at that point, the prosecutor and the police department should just stick to the facts. I mean, the rest of us can, we'll speculate about that and talk about it. But I think for them in their official capacities, they should just stick to the facts of what they know and don't put the families through anything more.
Mm-hmm. No, and I can see that. I can certainly see that. But it's already bad enough.
Yeah.
It's already bad enough with what happened to these kids. I mean, Xana was stabbed more than 50 times. Leslie, thanks for the super chat. Did you see what the interview room posted with emails between BK and WSU chief, and they met on April 11th? He was in town for that break-in. No, he was not. This was a Zoom meeting. I interviewed Chief Jenkins. I will tell you that right now. WSU police chief Gary Jenkins, who was the former Pullman police chief, he actually interviewed Brian Kohberger via Zoom. That's how that meeting happened. So he was not in town for that meeting. That was not an in-person meeting. Gary Jenkins told me all about that. You can watch that on Law and Crime. So that was a really.
Are we talking about the break-in?
Yeah,
like 10 months earlier.
Yeah, but it wasn't. Okay. It was
October
actually
21, I think.
Yeah, I think it was in August of 2021.
Okay.
So Jenkins interviews him for the Pullman Police Department internship.
Oh, right. Okay.
In April of 2022. It was via Zoom. He was not in town for that. August of 2021 in Pullman, there was a break-in, and everybody's acting like, oh my God, this is new news. This is not new news. The Pullman Police Department released some stuff. We covered this back in December when this first came about. There was a break-in of college girls in Pullman, and the suspect was a 5'2" Hispanic guy. And guess what? There's like a short Hispanic guy that lived next door to these women. And there was a knife found in the guy's apartment, and the girl kicked the guy in the stomach and he took off. So there was a suspect in that case. It was not Brian Kohberger, and Brian Kohberger was not in town. The only reason they looked at him for that was because after Kohberger's arrest, Moscow said, hey, we got this guy. We got this guy. It's a crime with a knife. You might want to look at him.
And a ski mask. I think the guy was wearing a ski mask as well. Yeah. I mean, that's not uncommon for break-ins like that. I mean, unfortunately, in college campuses and college towns. And I think what they did when they looked into it is just one of those things, an abundance of caution. You want to make it look like you overturned every stone and you looked at everything. You don't want to be caught later on going, oh, we didn't look into that. And so I think that they looked into it very, very diligently, and they determined that you're right. I mean, the descriptions of this guy were between 5'2" and 5'5". That's not a mistake most people are going to make. What's Kohberger, 5'10", 5'11"?
Something like that, 5'11", and he has really big feet.
Yeah, and he's a tall guy, and I think you don't make that mistake. And so I think they just looked into it for that reason. But unfortunately, in the internet age, it gives people, it gives the people out there that are looking for something more fodder.
And it's funny because a lot of news outlets are publishing this like this is brand new information. And it's not. Like, we covered it last December. Bobby, I don't think this is the last we've heard of him. I think that this guy will sell his story somehow without him getting paid for it. I think his existence in prison. I sit on a plane too long and I'm like going crazy. It sounds like hell on earth to me. To me, it's like the death penalty might even be better. As a human being, I'm talking. I mean, maybe this is perfect for Brian Kohberger. Like, he can sit in a box and not talk to anybody and read books and get on his tablet and talk to his mom every day and do whatever it is Brian Kohberger does and think about stuff and do what this guy does. But it sounds like hell, but I still think he's going to sell his story somehow.
Well, look, I know people still talk about the Son of Sam laws, but the Supreme Court overturned those Son of Sam laws on First Amendment grounds. And, people can, then all the states went back and tried to fashion state laws that kind of address that issue as well, about people profiting from their crimes. But look, the thing is, the families probably can and should sue him civilly and get a big judgment against him so that every dollar he ever makes or can ever be given gets siphoned off and back to the families. He has to pay off the restitution that was ordered by the court. But in addition to that, they can even get a bigger settlement. Now, of course, most of the judgments are simply just a piece of paper and you can't enforce it because he's got no money. But if he ever does do something or there's ever a loophole that he gets through, then they have a judgment that they can go and have settled, and any money that's going to go to him can be paid to the families and not get to him. So I would hope that they do that. They file a civil wrongful death action and get a judgment against him and just kind of keep it, in a drawer. And if ever it happens, they have that judgment that they can go and get any money that possibly could go to him.
Yeah, I'm surprised that none of these families have filed wrongful death actions against him. Even before, they could have done it before the trial. They didn't have to wait. I just want to look at a little more of this surveillance video from next door, and then we'll wrap this up. Remember, guys, to hit that thumbs up button, like and subscribe. I appreciate it. And if you have any final questions, let us know. I'm going to back it up just a second, because at 4:17 a.m., Xana fought for her life, Bobby. I mean, it is horrific what all of these kids went through, but Xana put up a fight. I mean, her fingers were nearly severed. She was stabbed 50 times. And I mean, she's fighting Brian Kohberger, and she finally I think we'll see this on this video. I think we hear her final moments. So. So you heard the thud.
Yeah.
You think it's screaming, and
look at how fast he takes that corner.
He tears out of there like a bat out of hell.
And then you see, actually, if you leave it go, you see his lights go from right to left now on the street behind it. There he goes. Yeah. Because that road, if you make a right, it makes kind of a loop and to the left. And so there you see him go around. And then you heard the dog. And of course, my dog barked on cue when he heard the dog on the video. My dog behind me there. And I have two big dogs. And at night, if they hear something, they have a certain bark that's unlike other barks. You know, barks are different. And to me, that dog barking sounded like he was barking at a particular noise, a particular thing at that hour. It's very quiet. So it sounded like an alert bark. It sounded like, because that's the dog, I believe, of the owner of the house where the camera is, not the dog in the house at 1122. I think that's a dog that's kind of more of a guard dog, like my two are, and was barking because he heard that thud. And you know, if I was still working at the FBI, I would have listened to that audio enhanced. We have an audio lab that enhances all the audio and stuff you can get. But to me, even on a first listen, I thought I heard a male voice and a female voice in that. It sounded like two voices, and it sounded like one was deeper and one was more upset and one was more authoritative. It just I would have those isolated, you know, in the audio lab and stuff, and then you'd be able to tell almost for sure. But that's the way it just sounded to me on first. And you know, we do know that some people in the house heard a male voice say something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," or something. I can't remember the exact quote. But that may have been what we were hearing in there just before that thud that you hear. I don't know. It's anybody's guess what that thud was. People are theorizing that could have been, you know, Ethan hitting the wall, because he's kind of wedged between the bed and the wall when they found him and stuff. But yeah, it's just horrific having to listen to that and knowing exactly what was happening in that house.
I never really thought about it being Ethan. I thought, but Xana's so tiny, so maybe her falling wouldn't have made that type of noise. But you may be right. I mean, we've been led to believe that he was asleep when this happened, but he very well maybe he stood up when she ran into the room, and that's why he ended up.
Yeah, I think he was asleep, and that's why I think she was the only one, and that's why she was the most viciously hit, because, you know, Maddie and Kaylee were kind of asleep when it happened, and then they obviously woke up during the attack. But Xana kind of went down that hallway having heard something and confronted him. So there was an actual confrontation. Then she's backing up, I think, and getting those defensive wounds as she's backing up towards that hallway that you showed earlier in the photo. And then when she gets to her doorway, I think maybe Ethan may have woke up, and then that's when he turns his attention to Ethan. I think that Xana might have still been alive, and then he dispatches with Ethan. Ethan hits the wall because they found him, you know, kind of wedged between the wall and the bed. And then he turns and he's talking to Xana, and that's what the other roommate heard, and that's what we hear, I think, on the video. And then he unfortunately, you know, then he turns back to Xana, and then he leaves. But I think that all kind of matches up. It's all, you know, I could be wrong on all of this, but that's just my take on what I've heard and how it pieces together.
No, that actually makes a lot more sense, because it sounded like he may have been asleep, but it makes more sense if she is running and let's say she runs back toward that bedroom to get away from him, and she makes enough noise to wake Ethan up. He stands up, and Kohberger confronts him somehow, and this is how Ethan passes away, is that's why he ends up being stabbed. He's not asleep. He's standing up, and then that's the thud. And then this violent confrontation with Xana takes place. That makes a lot more sense. We have some super chats. We'll wrap this up. Bobby is in California, sunny California. So it's early out there for him. Sophia from Iceland, you're so sweet. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you, Anjanette, for all that you do, watching you all the time from Iceland. This case is horrifying wherever you are from. It is, absolutely, and it's just horrific. My condolences to everyone involved, and excuse my language. She says F word BK forever. That's okay. We will excuse you for that one, Sophia. You're good on that one. The docket, I think, has given us a super chat as well. Let's scroll down to that. Furniture banging around as she fought him. That's what the docket is wondering the thud might be.
Very well could be. It very well, but I think it definitely came from Xana's room, and I think Xana was actually backing down that hallway facing him, because I think if she turns away, if she turns away, I think he grabs her and she never makes it to her room. He grabs her from behind and never makes it to her room. I think she's backing away, fighting him off, and then she gets to her doorway, and that's when he turns towards Ethan, because Ethan probably woke up at that point, groggy as you would be after a night of drinking and passing out in bed, and like I did many times in college. And then he leaves Xana, who's not expired yet, and then he turns back to Xana after he confronts Ethan, because Ethan was the biggest threat to him at that point. Ethan was a big kid, and he was a male, and so he would have been a bigger threat. And then he went back to Xana after that. That's just my theory.
That makes perfect sense, because if she's getting away from him and he's going after her, and he says, and Dylan said it was not in a nice way, it's okay, I'm going to help you. And she's trying to get away from him. And then he encounters Ethan in the bedroom. And then Ethan somehow ends up the way he did on the bed. And then she's still trying to fight. She's cornered in there. Ugh, it's horrific.
And that could have been the furniture moving when he either is confronting Ethan or he's going back to Xana. It very well could be the furniture hitting the wall. It sounded like it was hitting an exterior wall, because that's why the video from next door would have picked it up.
No doubt. We have a new member, and we're going to wrap it up for tonight, guys. Bobby, I really appreciate you for coming on. This was great. It's very interesting convo. I hope you'll come back another time. I do want to shout out our new member here, Honey Bun. Thank you for becoming a new member. Appreciate that. But Bobby, thank you so much. I hope you'll come back another time. Really enjoyed this conversation. And thank you to everybody for coming on and watching tonight. Remember to hit that thumbs up, like and subscribe, and I will stay on top of this. Everybody. Still trying to get some records for you. Thanks to the mods too. Thanks to Webby, Mel Mac, Monty, and Mo, and the docket for being here. And I will work to get more records for you. It's been really something. And more information, I will be working on getting that. And also I have an update on the Cincinnati case, if any of you guys have been following that. So I will work on getting that out this weekend. Everybody be safe and be well, and I'll talk to you another time. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.